You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Asa Winstanley. Hi, Asa.
Hi, Nora. Well, thank you for that devastating report. Brilliant work as always. I
Thank you.
mean, it's unbelievable. We're still here
I,
671 days
I don't.
later. And, we've talked recently in the live stream about, the kind of change in the mainstream media to an extent, and it's talking about famine in Gaza and hunger in Gaza and so forth.
Yeah.
Um, which is welcome to an extent, although far
Well,
too
they're
often
framing
that,
it as like a natural disaster.
yeah,
They're very reluctant to say who is doing the starving, why Israel is doing the starving, what it has done to starve people to this point, not just over the past, 2 or 3 months, 5 months, but over the past 80 years,
yeah,
to incapacitate Gaza's ability to feed itself, which Palestinians have done there for millennia.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
That's it. They're
yeah,
framing it as some sort of natural disaster.
right.
Enough that we know historically. As our colleague Dave Cronin wrote about recently, quite
Yeah,
often these kind of deliberately induced famines by colonial and imperialist powers are wrongly framed as some sort of natural disaster.
yeah,
But what I was really struck by your report this week was just how aside from the induced famine, the deliberately induced famine, all the other aspects of the Holocaust in Gaza carry on. They're still
yeah,
bombing, you know, they're still bombing of civilian targets over and over again, and the farce of the airdrops actually proving to be lethal in some cases, as you
yeah,
reported,
yeah,
on Monday.
yeah.
Uh,
And sowing chaos. I mean, there were images that came out just a few hours ago, which, I don't ever want to kind of like contribute to the sensationalism of these images of people scrambling to get aid off of the trucks or literally fighting each other for a bag of flour because it helps to strip Palestinians of their dignity, because this is an engineered chaos, as as Gaza's officials are have been saying for a very long time, that Israel wants chaos to be sown throughout Gaza, in order to, it's the old colonial tactic of divide and conquer, in order to turn neighbors against each other, in order to, split the community apart, in order to conquer it. And it is just unbearable. Uh, we've always said we've run out of words, but it is unbearable to see um, Israel just, you know, keep getting away with this,
yeah.
and to see Western governments, really cynically pretend to care,
Yeah.
by facilitating these airdrops. It is
And
just,
the armed
yeah,
gangs as well, the Palestinian armed gangs,
absolutely,
mercenaries who are
yeah,
working with Israel to help,
yeah, yeah,
further this kind of chaos and aid looting.
yeah,
We've covered in the past with the issue of the Abu Shabab militia.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
and our
exactly,
guest Mohammed Shahada, who's really followed this topic very closely, made a really good point about it, which is that in his view, they were not really their real goal is not actually to fight Hamas, although Israeli officials have said that.
right,
He said that's not realistic. Hamas has reported to have in the region of tens of thousands of quite well trained fighters, whereas this gang of criminals and ISIS affiliates and so forth um, is only about 300 people. So there's no way they can take on
yeah,
the Palestinian
yeah,
resistance effectively. It's more
yeah,
about this, as you said, divide and rule, sowing chaos in society.
yeah. Well, and meanwhile, governments like the UK are assisting uh, Israel and its criminal operations, its war crimes, with surveillance flights. And this is something that we've covered before with Matt Kennard, but we wanted to have him back on today because there are some new developments and kind of an entrenchment of this surveillance matrix. So, Asa, why don't you introduce Matt?
Yes, thank you, Nora. Just a reminder that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Mason Stanley with my colleagues Nora Bose-Freeman and Tamara Nassar. And of course, John Elmer will be on later with his resistance report. So we're going to return our gaze now to the UK and the long-standing, active and enthusiastic involvement of this country, the UK's Labour government, in Israel's genocide in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023. Returning to the show today to talk about all of that is the journalist Matt Kennard. Matt is the author of several books, including Irregular Army, an expose of neo-Nazi gangs and how they were recruited into the US Army, Silent Coup with the journalist Claire Provost, which is about how corporations overthrew democracy, and The Racket, a damning indictment of the US empire's control of the global economy for the benefit of its ruling classes. Matt has also done a lot of reporting on Palestine over the years. And he's done a lot to expose Britain's Israel lobby, and in particular, since the start of this genocide in Gaza, he has been the main journalist to document and really expose, I mean, almost single handedly, really, the participation of the British military and intelligence organizations in the genocide in Gaza, and breaking many stories about RAF spy flights over Gaza. In 2019, Matt co-founded the news website Declassified UK, but he now works as a freelancer for outlets including Palestine Deep Dive, and of course he's written for us in the past as well, and we hope he will do so again in the future. And so yeah, we've had Matt on. We had Matt on last year to talk about the same topic, but as Noah said, there's been new developments. And in his latest article for Palestine Deep Dive, which was published on Monday, with his colleague Abdullah Farouk, Matt and his colleague revealed that the responsibility of these UK spy flights, which are launched from a British airbase on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean, have now been handed over to a private military contractor. So Matt joins us now to talk about his new article and to unpack what all of that means. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
It's really good to have you back, Matt. So talk about your new article and what you've learned about changes in these British spy flights over Gaza at the end of July. We're going to come in, we'll talk about subsequent revelations since your article. But first, could you explain what your initial report reveals?
Yeah, well, firstly, I should just say that this is not like an ancillary story. This is a integral part of the genocide. And as Asa mentioned at the start, it's crazy that basically I'm the only one been covering it, journalist. There's a whole mainstream media with thousands of journalists here and no one's covered this. But I think Britain leads in terms of providing intelligence. In fact, 𝐓𝐴 did a report subsequent to some of the work we were doing and found that nearly 50% of all reconnaissance flights over Gaza have been flown by the RAF, which is more than double Israel itself. So you're talking about a very, very important part of the genocide that anyone who is interested in getting justice for the victims of it and holding to account the perpetrators needs to look at London and look at the people who are involved in these programs. But there have been big developments this week, which started with our story. And basically, these flights have gone from December 2023 from RAF 𝐓𝐴 on Cyprus, which is the huge airbase there. Now, the government did announce that they were going to start surveillance flights, but they didn't say where they were going from, how long they were going to be in the air, what plane, anything. And basically, I found out where they were going from. I then tracked them up till recently. And anyone who follows me on Twitter is probably very bored by me posting flight GIFs. But I've just done it because I feel like it's very important to get the receipts up there, because I knew that a time like this week would come. And this week there is a breakthrough. But anyway, so these flights have been going pretty much every day for 20 months. And the intelligence, up till now, we knew that the intelligence was going to Israel. But whenever the government was asked anything about the nature of that intelligence or where it was going in Israel, they'd always say, well, it's only to do with hostage rescue and it's only going to the relevant authorities in Israel. But they never said what those relevant authorities were. So anyway, I started noticing, well, firstly, I noticed that the spy flights stopped for a while. And then we found on another website which does live tracking of sites, we saw a plane circling Gaza. and we tracked it, and it had left from RAF at Kritiri, and it wasn't owned by the RAF. This was last week. It was owned by an American corporation. So that's two major sort of alarms. One is, why is a US company flying from RAF at Kritiri? The second one is, wow, they've got their transponder on over Gaza, because the 20 months of these flights, every single time you look at them online, they turn their transponder off over the sea on their way to Gaza. So we never have known what they're doing over Gaza. So this was the first evidence we have of what they were doing. And I think it's important evidence that should be part of a legal case, to be totally honest with you. Yeah, it's up on the screen now. So they were over, and it was over Khan Yunis for 3 hours in the Khan Yunis area. There was a airstrike which killed civilians the following day.
This is a real breakthrough in the story, because
huge.
I mean, you mentioned these GIFs you've been of the flight paths you've been posting over the last nearly 2 years to your Twitter about this, but until now they always stop just short of Gaza. That's correct,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly. This is the first time, due to this kind of effective privatization of these spy flights to a US contractor.
Exactly.
It seems they accidentally left their transponder on over Gaza itself.
Yeah, exactly. So the story developed because obviously we contacted the Ministry of Defense and said, what's going on? Why is there a contracted plane? They didn't give it even on the record statement. They gave no information. I contacted the US Department of Defense. They've referred me to the UK Ministry of Defense, and I contacted the company, who didn't respond. So we had very little information about who was operating them, what had happened to the program. But we had noticed it. We tracked where this plane, the new US spy plane, had been, and we saw that it had left the US airport called Hagerstown Regional Airport in Maryland on the 12th of July. It had gone to Iceland, then Northern Ireland, and Canada, and then Sicily, and then at Kritiri. It was a 3-day trip. And then we saw from the 20th of July to the 25th of July that it actually went on its missions over Gaza with the RAF plane. So it was obviously a training exercise. So, but in the article, we speculated about who could be operating. I thought it might be the Americans or the Israelis or even the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Anyone can be these clients. But anyway, it became a big story because I tweeted that video on Monday. It got over 3 million views on Twitter, over 1 million on Instagram. And for the first time, a mainstream journalist got interested in the story. And there was an article in the Times yesterday. There's been 2 this week, 2 very big breakthrough articles. Sorry,
well, let me take you through some of that, because I've got some of the quotes from that lined up. So, as you mentioned, you published this information on Twitter, and then you published your full article, your scoop for Palestine Deep Dive, on Monday. And this appears, as you've said, to have finally hammered a crack in this kind of wall of silence that the British media has really erected since these surveillance missions over Gaza first started flying in December 2023, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So on Tuesday, then we saw finally a mainstream newspaper in Britain, the Times of London, and they reported on your story effectively without really crediting you at first, and they wrote, quote, "The British military is continuing to fly spy planes over Gaza to help Israel find missing hostages as Palestinian civilians are starved and killed. Government sources have confirmed to the Times," so they're back, they're confirming your reporting. It continues, "Intelligence gathered by undisclosed RAF aircraft and other British assets in the region is being handed over to the Israeli military, so it has real-time information on the movement of captured Israelis," end of quote. So, I know that when you asked them for comment, Matt, the Ministry of Defense refused to comment. So it's highly significant, I think, that a mainstream media source has finally and belatedly confirmed this.
Can I just say something about that quote as well? Because there's 2 major breakthroughs in that line that you read out. As I mentioned, up till now, the government has said, we only give them to, it's only hostage rescue, and we only give them to relevant authorities. They would never say what it is. Government sources told the Times in that fast article, number one, that they're handing it to the Israeli military. Number two, that they're doing it in real time, because the Shadow R1 spy plane can do that. One of its capabilities is it can send the intelligence to the ground while it's in the sky. So this should be evidence in a war crimes trial, because that they purposefully not told us it's the Israeli military, although we obviously knew that it would be. But the fact they're doing it in real time, and the point they always say, which is that it's hostage rescue, right, is insane. Because if you're handing this intelligence in real time to the Israeli military, how can you then say to them, well, you can't use it for anything else apart from hostage rescue? They don't know where it's going when it's in Israel. It's like as if Israel is a trusted party in anything, let alone using intelligence in the way they're telling the British. So it's but as I say, the whole program is unraveling, which is beautiful to see, because it's only been upheld by secrecy and the fact there's been no scrutiny by the mainstream media. And now both those things have been smashed. And that article was very important, because, and that article was kind of a reaction to our piece in a way, because we left open the question of who were operating these flights. And actually the fact that it was the UK that would be subcontracted out was low down my list of possibilities, because it still doesn't make sense to me. Why would you need, they've got 8 of these Shadow R1 planes, right? And they've been doing it for 20 months. And then suddenly they decide, oh, we're going to subcontract it out to a US company. My hunch is, now knowing now that they did do that, is that they did it to conceal the program more, because they were coming under increasing heat. The first time a minister has ever been asked about them, which is insane, by a mainstream journalist, was a couple of weeks ago when David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was asked on BBC Radio about them. He was asked, he said, are we handing intelligence to the Israeli military? And he said, no. So straight lied.
Yeah, well, we're gonna come on to that, but I'd like to talk about the Second Times article first. So there was this revelation that you've talked about the significance of it, but there was a second article yesterday which actually the Times reported as a bigger exclusive story, and they explicitly credited Palestine Deep Dive with a scoop, and they kind of furthered the reporting from their own sources inside the Defence Ministry itself. And the paper reported that, quote, the British military is hiring American contractors to carry out secret spying missions over Gaza for Israel because, and this relates to the reasons, because of a shortage of RAF aircraft. Ministry of Defence sources have told the Times that the government is paying a company based in Nevada to look for hostages, end of quote. So what do you make of that, Matt? And what did you make of the second story in general?
Well, I laugh because that doesn't add up. I don't understand, after 20 months and they've got 8 of these planes, how they suddenly decide that they've got a shortage of the planes. Doesn't make any sense. So that is still an open question that I think that Times reporter should look into, actually, which is why they suddenly changed to a subcontractor. I think that it is likely that it's to do with concealing the program, which is funny because it was the moment when it really exposed the program, because we found that the pilot forgot to turn off his transponder. But there's many interesting parts of that story, but one because it's based on inside sources at the Ministry of Defence, and one talks about the fact that they forgot to turn off their transponder, and the UK military source says this was a schoolboy error that would not have been done by an RAF pilot, which is true. They've been doing it for 20 months and religiously turned off their transponder over the sea, and now this new sort of contractor just forgot to do it. But that article is very, very important, I think, because it's not just about the story. That the first part is about confirming our story that these contractors have been hired, but the second part is all about these senior sources within the UK Ministry of Defence talking about how much unrest and distress there is within the Ministry of Defence about this Spy for Israel program. One says, he said, it's outrageous. I'm paraphrasing, but it's outrageous that in the context of us seeing these pictures of starving Palestinians, we're not only continuing our program, but we're privatizing it. We should be stopping it completely, which is, there's been zero about the sort of feeling within the Ministry of Defence itself. So I think that's really significant.
Yeah, and I have that. I know Nora's got another question for you, but just before that, I've actually got that source here in front of me, and it's quote, military sources, and this is from the Second Times article. Military sources are baffled by the decision to privatize RAF intelligence gathering tasks to help Israel. questioning why the government hasn't pulled support after photographs emerged of starving Palestinians. A senior British military source speaking to the Times on the condition of anonymity said, instead of sending a message to Israel that we aren't going to do surveillance for you, we are happy to hire an American company and pay for it. So there's kind of almost dissent within the ministry.
This is huge. That is really important in the Times as well. So it's senior sources within the Ministry of Defence in the so-called paper of record in Britain voicing unrest about this program, and I think it should have an impact. To be honest with you, these flights should have been grounded. Well, they should never have started, but they should have been grounded a long time ago. And part of the reason they haven't been is because the mainstream media is not engaged with it. In fact, they haven't engaged with it at all. So that's why I think that mainstream journalists are complicit in the genocide, because the UK side is very significant and it leads in intelligence. And if they'd come under this kind of scrutiny much earlier, that kind of participation could have been ended, because people don't know about it, so they couldn't pressure the government to stop. Yeah. But the article is, and also not just what the government said, or the fact that the Times is covering this story is significant. You know, that the media would not have touched this 6 months ago. And you're seeing, I mean, everyone's talking about this, and it is true that the mainstream media, as you mentioned, all right, in its own establishment framing way, but there has been a shift after those pictures came out from the aid planes of the complete destruction, Holocaust in Gaza. And they're trying to save face in a way, but it's obviously way too late. But I think that again, the fact that the Times, which is a Murdoch paper and not known to be critical of the military in any significant way, is covering these stories and actually investigating and publishing it is significant as well. So hopefully the momentum will carry on. I mean, we have all the receipts. That's all I'll say. Like, I'm very, very pleased with what's happened this week, because I think there has been a massive shift on this story, and hopefully it will stop the ground of flights. But that doesn't. All the people who were involved, I'm talking about the ministers who ordered it and oversaw the program, need to be indicted. I believe they should definitely be investigated, but I believe they should be indicted for being accessories to genocide and participants. Because if you are collecting intelligence over a territory which is being attacked by a genocidal power who's committing sort of hourly every war crimes every minute, and you're giving that intelligence to their military, but we now know it's the military in real time, then you're a participant. You can't say you're not a party of that conflict. You are a participant. And that's not me saying, that's legal experts say that as well. So I think the fact we have that video is important as well, because the other point is they kept it secret, because obviously the program was very different to how they were presenting it, right? So it was all hostage rescue. But even that video shows that doesn't look like that. Looks like it's in the Khan Yunis area. It looks like it's spying on sort of Hamas or militants rather than hostage rescue. Because, and the other thing is there's no British hostages in Gaza. There were even when they started the program, there were 2. So you're talking about thousands of hours of footage for 2 hostages, and now there's none, and they still go. So it's a complete. That's why I'm saying it's unraveling, because it's all indefensible, and it's huge. I think the big question now, which I hope reporters look into, is why they went to the subcontractor. Because I also think that the government is aware of everything I've just said, which is that it's legally liable as a participant in the genocide because of these spy flights, and now it either wants to conceal them. Because the important point about this new plane is none of its takeoffs and landings are registered on the websites I use, on the commercial flight tracking websites. So the only reason we found it was because we saw it when it was in the sky and it forgot to turn off its transponder. If we hadn't seen that, we'd never have even been aware of it. The original RAF flights, the Shadow R1 ones, they did the takeoffs and landings appeared. So in my opinion, it might have been a shift to try and conceal the program completely. Because I was tweeting about it every day. I don't know if that would be why, but every time Keir Starmer made a statement about like how appalled he was by what was happening in Gaza, I just literally, as he was saying it, he'd sent a spy flight in over Gaza to collect intelligence for the people doing it. So yeah, but again, so that's my hunch, but it's an open question, and I think there'll probably be a very interesting answer to that question.
Well, Matt, You posted to your Twitter a censorship order, what's called a D notice, sent by an army officer in October 2023 to the British media, which, quote, advised them not to publish or broadcast information about British military deployments to what he called sensitive areas of the Middle East. What is a D notice, and why did it take nearly 2 years for the British media to start finally doing their job and ignoring this one?
Yeah, well, so a D notice is this thing. It's an advisory notice that is sent out to all British media editors by the UK military and intelligence services to say we don't want you to publish information about certain things. Now, the D notice is meant to be secret in terms of, as you see there, it says private and confidential, not for publication, broadcast, or use on social media. But obviously, this one's not anymore because I published it. But that was sent to every single editor in the UK. So you talk about the Guardian, the Telegraph, Daily Mail, BBC, ITV, Channel 4. Not one of them publicised it. Not one of them, and not one of them. And this was when it was clear what was happening in Gaza. It's 28th of October, and it was in reaction to a story which was published in The Sun, one of the most horrific newspapers in the world, on October 27th. But it was about the SAS, which is UK Special Forces, had deployed to RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus for Gaza operations, right? So they sent this out the following day. And all of the media that it was sent to abided by the advisory, because not one bit of information has come out about what the SAS have done. And I bet you it's similar to these spy flights. I bet it's an outsized role. Knowing what I know about the SAS, they terrorized large parts of the world, and they may have been on the ground in Gaza. We don't know. They may have. I would say my hunch would be that they definitely went to Israel and were in an advisory capacity, because that's they do that a lot in operations. And they went in one of these planes that were going from Akrotiri to Cyprus. So it's again another highly secretive part of UK involvement, direct participation in the genocide that needs to be investigated. But I published that D notice because I think that it doesn't explain the whole story of why the mainstream media has not covered this stuff, but it's probably part of it. And it's completely morally repugnant that people might have had information about participation in one of the worst crimes of this era or any era, and they could have published it, but they didn't because they'd got a voluntary advisory from the UK military. This is the important point about D-Notice. Officially, it's voluntary. And in fact, we got one at Declassified once about a story we did about UK support for Paul Biya, the dictator in Cameroon. And they asked us in a very sort of gentlemanly British aristocratic way, just come on, can you just take this censor this bit? And we said no. And there was no official comeback. But the point is, you can say no, and no one said no to that, and no one publicized it. So they're complicit as well. But there's another, but one story which I do think may have been noticed, may have had a big impact, is in the New York Times last year in June 2024. They published an article based on an Israeli military official leak, who said that a UK spy team had been deployed inside Israel early in the genocide to help with their Gaza program, their Gaza operation. They said that this UK team was providing intelligence they couldn't collect on their own, and was providing value added. They're the quotes, right? So this is in the New York Times, one maybe the most famous global newspaper. Not one single word about that spy team, which might still be there, by the way, we don't know, has ever appeared in a UK newspaper. So I can't. Obviously, part of it is just the traditional UK establishment journalist subservience to power. But that is, when it's in the New York Times and they're not saying anything, and it's that kind of direct participation, then I think probably the D-Notice had some impact in that case. But again, we don't know. This is all secretive for a reason, because they're trying to cover up what they've done. Now they've tried it they're not achieving it in a way they have been, because the mainstream media has been mobilized a bit. But there's been a cover-up going on for the whole time. Because the other point, and I'll just finish with this, sorry to go on, but RAF Akrotiri, this base on Cyprus, it is the major international site for the support and supply of the genocide in Gaza. So it's hugely important. And no mainstream media has covered it at all. The only reason people knew about it was because of the work I was doing at Declassified, and have carried on doing since I left Declassified. But that caused protests in Cyprus. That caused the president of Cyprus to have to make a comment. The president of Northern Cyprus. All those stories, all that, even the protests, even the president speaking, has never appeared in the UK mainstream media newspaper, which is insane, because you're talking about a genocide, which is the worst crime a state can commit, and you talk about our government participating in it. You would think maybe, like, my kind of expectations of the mainstream media is low, so maybe I wasn't expecting to investigate it, but at least cover it if there's massive protests or the president of a country is talking about your base. But it hasn't happened. But it would all come out. I'm sure about it, and I think that maybe this week is the start of the process. I really think it was very powerful that we got that video, because it makes it like it's like a crime scene now. You know, when you look at it, you're like, rah, this is they never wanted those visuals to come out. And it got over 3 million views on Twitter, which is, I was talking to Ahmed yesterday, Ahmed Al-Nuka, Palestine Deep Dive. I was like, you know, that's more papers than they even sell in Britain. This is the beauty of social media. You can get the stories out. So hopefully it will change. I don't know if it will change things, but definitely I think I said this to you before. Look, this is a long project for all of us to carry on exposing what happened during the genocide. And obviously the genocide continues, but this is going to be years' work, and it can have an impact. And I think we can bring mainstream media on board. Like, this is, the Times articles are very significant, because it's kind of like a break through a wall that was there, and hopefully it will incentivize other mainstream media to get on board, particularly the Guardian, because obviously they've got huge resources. If the Guardian investigative team put 5 reporters on this story, we'd know a lot very quickly. The BBC, of course, they've got hundreds of journalists, but they'd never do it. But the point is that I've been trying to do this basically solo, and have got to this point already. So I really want to be joined in this by mainstream media who can actually cause change. And I hope that these flights will now be granted. The interesting thing, I'll just say this. These flights were not. So as soon as I asked the company and the Ministry of Defense and the US Department for Defense for comment, the flights stopped appearing on, even when they were in the air, because the website I used, even if you can't see when it's taking off, you can kind of see its flight path. And then they stopped taking off. So now we think the transponder's off completely, which they should have done it first, right? It's kind of like comedy that they didn't just leave their transponder for the whole thing. But now I think that they might still be going. So actually, we haven't got any evidence that they've gone for the last 4 or 5 days. But my hunch is they're still going with this US contractor. Also, the Ministry of Defense refused to tell the Times the length or the cost of the contract with this US company. It's like that's indefensible. We're paying for that, the UK taxpayer. We've paid for this whole program to support and participate in a genocide, and they won't even, and now they've subcontracted out, and they won't even tell us about the contract or how much it costs us. It's obscene.
And we don't know the name of this American company yet? We do.
Yeah, so the company is called Straight Flight Nevada Commercial Leasings, LLC, which is a subsidiary of the Sierra Nevada Corporation, which is a huge military contractor.
And they have to fly the planes themselves, right?
Yes, so they got this thing called contractor-owned, contractor-operated, which is COCO. That's how that's what they call it, COCO contracts. But so that's what the plane is being done. It's being paid by but we didn't know that when we wrote the article originally. We thought that it had been leased maybe by the American military or the CIA or the Israelis. We didn't know, because it just didn't make sense to me that they would, if it was still paid for, the client was still the UK, they'd suddenly move to the exact same plane, just not the RAF one. It doesn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense to me why they've done it. But but yes, now it's contractor-owned, contractor-operated. Again, it does highlight parts of our global governance system that I'm not usually exposed to. Like, I didn't know that you could just rent a spy plane and fly over a war zone. Like, could you have to be a government to do that, or can a private individual do that? Because the way they present this on their website, this company, Nevada Leasing, Commercial Leasings, they say we do COCO 𝐓𝐶oco contracts all over the world, and it doesn't specify that it's a government. So does that mean, like, I don't know, like a company, a corporation could just rent one of these planes and send it over wherever they want? They probably can, but because there's not a global governance like that. But it was kind of shocking to me that you can do that. The other point is that, look, they've said about this very tight intelligence sharing relationship from these flights with Israel. Obviously, that's out the window with the corporation doing it, because you can't even oversee what the corporation is doing, really. When they're in the sky, it's a whole different accountability mechanism. So they could be like, how are they checking that the corporation are not sending stuff they shouldn't be to Israel? So it exposes the fact the whole program was a sham in terms of how it was presented as hostage rescue, and does, I think, really show, maybe more than any other country apart from the United States, how the UK ministers should be indicted for this. Because, as I said, we're scratching the surface. Most of the work on this has been done by me. And like, I think there's enough information already to indict Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, Grant Shapps, David Cameron. So if we started getting the media involved in following up on the stories that they have, if we started getting legal institutions with the process of discovery, actually getting secret information that we don't have access to, then it will be a slam dunk at the ICC. I mean, my hopes aren't high for that, because we all know how international law works, and it's mainly for official enemies of the empire. But I think we should continue to build a pressure, and there is momentum now to really push on with this, because especially, as I said, the feeling with the Ministry of Defence, I've never seen that kind of explicit speaking out against the policy of the Ministry of Defence from senior members of the military. It's quite amazing. And they said, one of the quotes was, there's hard drives worth of intelligence that have been collected over Gaza by the British military and handed to Israel. So again, that's information for a war crimes trial.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the war crimes trial, and despite the, by now fairly open fact of these intelligence flights over Gaza, the British government have been incredibly dishonest about what they've been up to. Here we've got a clip here of what Foreign Minister David Lammy said about it only a couple of weeks ago.
What support is being given to the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli Defence Forces militarily by the UK? For example, RAF flights which overfly Gaza. Is information from those flights being given to the Israeli military to help them conduct their war in Gaza?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Because it's been said before that information was helping to locate and potentially release the hostages. So fine, that's a commitment from you, a clear commitment that information from RAF military surveillance flights is not handed to Israel to help them, for example, identify targets in Gaza.
We are not assisting, and it would be quite wrong for the British government to assist in the prosecution of this war in Gaza. We are not doing that and would never do that.
I mean,
You're going to
just,
The Hague.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing, though, isn't it, to hear that?
Yeah. I mean, for context,
just the bravado. Like, this is how Western governments who facilitate and engineer and finance and cover up for genocides always say that, oh, we have nothing to do with that. Oh, it's such a terrible thing. And meanwhile, they're re-upping these contracts all over the place. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly their culpability. And because there is a level of impunity that I think we've never seen before, David Lammy feels quite comfortable lying through his teeth.
Yeah, and that was on on the BBC on Radio 4 on the Today programme in the morning. So it's like the main very influential morning news programme on the premier sort of flagship BBC radio programme, and he's clearly saying that quote, "We are not assisting, and it would be quite wrong for the British government to assist in the prosecution of this war in Gaza." He's just flat out saying no, and yet we saw in this Times article, which came out only a couple of weeks after he said that on the radio, that from the Times' own sources inside the Ministry of Defence, that the UK is sending real-time intelligence to Israel from these spy flights. And there was another quote in those Times articles where a British Army veteran, Major General Charlie Herbert, also told the paper that, quote, "It's all good and proper, saying they're handing over intelligence for the purpose of locating hostages, but in reality, that intelligence is just as likely to be used as used for targeting for Hamas and others. So,
Well, yeah, what Charlie Herbert said is so true, and it just doesn't make sense. If you're sending real-time intelligence to the military, what are you putting? What are you sending it in sending it over with a little email saying, "Oh yeah, only use this for hostage rescue." Like, it just doesn't make sense.
it's like when they say they're arming Israel only for defensive
got
purposes.
loads of like pictures of this area we're going to bomb civilians from the UK, but they said we can't use it because it's only to do with hostage rescue. We can't use it for bombing civilians. It's preposterous and it's a lie, and it should end with some ministers who ordered it to in The Hague. But also, they've obviously lied to Parliament as well, which is a violation of the parliamentary standards and procedures for a long time. But again, there's been very little pushback from the whole thing's crumbling now because there's been a little bit of scrutiny. The whole thing never made sense at all. So that's why it's crumbling to pieces. And all the fact that he lies with such confidence. But the thing, he has form as well, because the other thing he lied about, which I exposed with others, was there was the only material action that the UK has done to stop its participation in genocide was suspend some arms licenses in September 2024, right? And they said we're going to suspend every anything that can be used in Gaza, carved out the F-35 parts, which is 15% produced in the UK. So the actual bit that we could have actually had an impact on the genocidal war machine, we still export that. But anyway, that's a different story. But we did a story based on customs data from Israel about munitions that had gone, and there'd been 8,000 munitions sent to Israel in the months after he'd said that. Munitions of war, that's the quote in the Israeli customs directory. So he lied straight. He lied. They also never publicized what those 29 arms licenses that they suspended were, which is hugely suspicious in itself, right? If you're making a great fanfare about stopping arms that could be used in Gaza, why not just publicly tell us what those arms licenses are? But we still don't know, and that's because it was a fraud and a farce, and actually they continued sending thousands of munitions of war, likely which were used in Gaza. So he lies through his teeth the whole time. It's quite shocking to see them lie so confidently, though. That's another example I had recently, and the Labour seem worse than the Tories on this. I don't know why, but I got a leak from a civil servant about a meeting that was going to happen between Lisa Nandy, who's culture secretary, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐿, who's the Israeli ambassador here. And the civil servant had seen the briefing notes for Lisa Nandy, and they said that she was going to tell 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐿 that the BBC was institutionally anti-Semitic because of its, I don't even know what airing Bob Villain. I don't know what it was specifically referring. I think it was just she's subservient to she was just saying what the Israelis wanted. Anyway, I published that on Twitter, the leak, right? And then journalists followed up, and initially all these like Zionist journalists were like, "Oh, you're such an idiot. All my sources in the culture department are saying that this is made up." And the government had said that this document didn't exist. And then about a couple of hours later, a journalist and they told it to a journalist at the National, which is actually a very good Scottish newspaper. Anyway, they called him back later and said, "Actually, you know what? It does exist. We lied. But it was a draft. It wasn't the final one." But I was quite like, it just shows that they will outright lie. And they'll outright lie about more trivial things like that. And they'll outright lie about participating in a genocide. And they need to be, well, firstly, they need to be removed from office for misleading Parliament, and then they need to be sent to The Hague for being participants in war crimes and genocide. And we're in I know when I say that, sound like it's never going to happen. And I know everyone thinks that when you say it, but look, we're in a new world now. We know that these people have never been as exposed as they are. People are awake in a way they haven't been for a long, long time. So we have to really, that kind of change in consciousness. People are more open to the idea that we're ruled by genocidal war criminals than they've ever been, even though it's been the case for a long time. But I think that I'll keep doing it, and we all need to keep doing the work to make sure these people face justice.
Yeah. Well, we just have a couple minutes left, Matt. But the spy flights over Gaza are, of course, not the only way that the UK has been aiding and abetting Israel's genocide. You reported for Declassified UK last year that Israeli military planes have been landing in several locations across the UK since October 2023. Tell us briefly about that and why it's important to keep this also in focus.
Yeah, I actually did a more recent article for Dropsite News about this very issue, and we found, again, these were flights that aren't registered as landing or taking off in Britain, but we found 9 different Israeli air-to-air refueling planes that had landed in the UK under the Labour government, and we tracked what these planes had been doing in the days around when they arrived in the UK, and they'd been off the coast of Gaza, refueling fighter jets bombing Gaza. So we are participants in a very real way in that regard as well, because you can't. Well, and again, we don't know what they were doing in the UK, why they were landing, whether they were refueling here. But these are planes belonging to a military whose former defense, who was formerly run by a ICC, a war criminal suspect, and there's been, again, that wasn't picked up in the mainstream media again. So this is interesting, isn't it? Because this has moved on very quickly because the Times took it up. If the Times had taken up that story, the same thing would have happened. Then Israeli planes would have stopped being allowed to land, I imagine, because people would have heard about it. So you see how the complicity of the mainstream media by dropping the ball on this. And in fact, the interesting thing, the article you just put up was the first article about this subject. And one of the planes had landed at Glasgow Prestwick Airport in Scotland. And as a result of that article, Scotland rescinded access to the Israeli Air Force to land in Scotland. And that was just alternative media doing that. Can you imagine if these stories had been picked up in the mainstream media, particularly the last one I did for Dropsite? So, and then sorry, I should mention this as well before we go. Just recently, about a month or 3 weeks ago or so, the head of the Israeli Air Force, Tomer Bar, who is one of the architects of the whole genocide, he's the monster that sits in air-conditioned offices in Tel Aviv, pointing at targets on a map, residential buildings full of kids and families. He's been doing that for 2 years. He's been in post the whole time as the head of the Israeli Air Force. He was secretly invited to Britain to go to a RAF, it's what's called an air tattoo, it's just a air show at RAF Fairford in the west of England. That was, again, a secret mission that was only exposed because we saw the flight going from Israel. And then an Israeli journalist used the source to find out who was on it, and it was Tomer Bar. Again, wasn't picked up or written about in any mainstream media, but you just see that Britain is a servant of the Israelis. It can't push back for whatever reason. I mean, ACE has done all the most important work on the role of the Israel lobby. From looking into this stuff, I do believe that's the integral factor in why we're doing this. I don't think it serves any UK national interest role.
It's so stark when you look at Lisa Nandy in particular. I mean, she just says whatever they want. Basically, it's insane.
It's crazy. It is insane. And in the US, I mean, it's hard to shock me these days. But when Trump said that he was going to stop disaster relief for any state that boycotted Israel, I'm like, what's going on here? You got the most powerful empire in human history, and it's being basically just doing the bidding of a country that's smaller than Wales. But I think part of it is that for whatever reason, and I can make some speculation about what reason, but for whatever reason, people haven't talked about the Israel lobby for decades as much as we should have. Apart from like John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt did that important book, but there's been a big kind of like, we don't want to go there. Because I think probably because of the sort of the idea it feeding into anti-Semitic tropes, but the fact that they've not been analysed, scrutinised, means it's managed to accrue so much power that it's quite insane. It's really bananas. It's like Nandy, you mentioned, like the fact she would go. This is a woman who was the head of the Labour Friends of Palestine. I mean, I know that's an absurd organization, but still, the fact she'd go to the far right ambassador, who is like a fascist,
a settler leader, like a leader of the most far right settlers, for many years.
And this is the Labour Party, and go and say that the BBC is institutionally anti-Semitic for airing Glastonbury, where someone said something mean about the IDF. It's pretty shocking, and something has to change. I mean, I do, again, like we're saying, a lot of things are changing and have changed over the past 2 years. People talk openly about what Zionism is as an ideology now in a way they didn't before. People talk about the Israel lobby, and I don't think it's going to go back to how it was. And it can't go back to how it was. And we need to push on that momentum, that what they call the Overton window has 100% been shifted. And loads of stuff me and you, Asa, were saying during the Corbyn years, and we were called cranks and seen as, like, everyone's saying that stuff now. So hopefully you're not sure about that.
No, I completely agree with you, but it's you never get thanked for being right too early.
No,
but
we don't need to be thanked. But I think that
it's just do the work. Do you know what I mean?
And also, what the work you did, particularly with your book and covering the Israel lobby during the Corbyn years, although yes, you were widely attacked, and the fact is we have that store of information now. It literally wouldn't exist without your work for Electronic Intifada. So it's a very important historic document, or all that work together. Without, I won't do any more arse licking. So.
I believe the youth call it glazing.
Yeah, glazing. Okay. Okay.
Matt, it's always a real honor to talk to you, and the work that you're doing with just tracking the kind of minutia, the details of these cooperative, contracts with the genocidal Israeli government and the UK is really, really important. And you're right, it's documenting history. It's making sure that these criminals can't get away with this, that they will be tracked and haunted and brought to justice eventually.
Yes.
Well, I like the thing I thought, and I think we all thought this, right, which is that we've all wanted to just focused on wanting to stop it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what can I do? What can I do? And I remember just being like, well, I'm in the UK. I was working for Declassified when it started. I was like, I need to just do everything I can to expose the UK connection. And it's like everyone's doing it, like in their own way. So I mean, nothing is going to stop it. But you have to do what you have to do.
So important.
It's an all hands on deck situation.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Matt Kennard. Where can people get in touch with you and follow your work?
They can find my flight path gifts on Twitter. I'm at Kennard Matt. And I also work with Palestine Deep Dive these days. So check out Palestine Deep Dive, who you guys know well, led by Ahmed Al-Nouk, who's the founder of We Are Not Numbers, which is an amazing organization.
Well, thank you for all the work that you do and for being with us again on
Thanks,
the
Matt.
Electronic Intifada live stream, Matt.
All right, take care. Thanks for having me.